Some stories are almost too scary to tell, so listen up. The Hell House LLC movies have terrified me and millions with their story of the Abaddon Hotel and the Carmichael Manor. Now imagine a haunted house where shadow figures and these crazy, scary clowns possess people. Demons lurk in the basement, and everybody who stays too long either loses their minds or much, much worse. Well, you know me, I wanted to find the real version, the actual house that matched every beat of that nightmare. 4 weeks of research and 200 cups of coffee later, I found it.
Come on, there's gotta be something creepy out here somewhere. Not that one. Been done to death. Next. Weird, but not spooky enough. Ugh, coffee break. Think. Wait, hold on, what is this? Yes. This is it, the
Union, Missouri. The Screaming House. And what happened there makes Hell House LLC look like a Disney movie. What's going on, Midnight Mafia? I hope you all had a great Thanksgiving, and for those who don't do Thanksgiving, then I just hope you had a great Thursday. Now this, I'm not gonna lie to you, I would consider myself a, horror aficionado, if you would. I've watched hundreds, if not thousands of horror movies. It might be my favorite genre. And it's like that itch you get, like when you go on a roller coaster and you're like, I want to feel that again. Once you see a scary movie, it's like that. But it's hard to ever feel that again, to feel scared. So whether it's the Conjuring movies or these movies or Mike Myers or this, that, it's hard to get that feeling of being scared out of your mind. And just so happens on Amazon Prime, one day I was going through and I saw Hell House LLC. And I believe the 5th one just dropped. And don't worry, there are no spoilers of any of the 5 movies in this real story. But I can honestly tell you that Hell House LLC, especially the first one, was one of those movies where I was like, oh my god, it's 3 a.m., I'm sitting on the chair, I have no blanket, and I'm getting the chills. I'm telling you, you're gonna love it if you haven't seen it. But without any further ado, as of now, it's time to slip into a mind that's not our own. Let's go. Okay, I want you to imagine this. Go back to May 2001. A man named Stephen LeChance stood on his front porch of this old craftsman house in Union, Missouri, feeling relief for the first time in months. He was a single father with 3 kids and 1 week away from homelessness after his divorce. This house, spacious rooms, individual bedrooms for each child, a real backyard. It felt like his salvation. And the place was almost way too good to be true. The landlady was very strange during the open house. She asked these odd questions about Stephen's family and their beliefs, their bonds, and kept saying that the house needed the right people. But Stephen needed this house. So when she called 2 days later saying she'd chosen his family, well, he signed immediately. Moving day was actually Memorial Day weekend. And as Stephen and his kids carried the boxes, a car drove past slowly. The driver rolled down his window and said, "Hope you guys get along okay here." And then the stranger just drove off. Stephen's daughter, Lydia, noticed something else. People walking down their block would cross to the other side of the street rather than pass by their house. Every single person. But that could be a coincidence, right? Well, that's when the nightmares started. And that's when Stephen's youngest son, Matthew, went to the basement to help hook up this garden hose. The basement had a dirt floor, fruit cellar, and what they called the butcher shower, which was this old drainage system that was built into the concrete floor. But that's when Stephen heard Matthew scream, and he found his 9-year-old son standing in the kitchen, shaking, standing in a puddle. Matthew had wet himself, and he said,
"Something chased me up the basement steps. Daddy, it was big, and I could hear breathing behind me."
So, Steven kind of doesn't really know what to do at this point, so he goes and he checks the basement with his other two kids, kind of to reassure them that, hey, guys, nothing's going on, and they saw nothing. Just the dropped hose and shadows. He told himself it was their imagination. But the next day, the lights started. Now imagine this, Steven was making dinner when a blinding white light flooded through his window. So he ran outside just to check and see what the heck is this, but there's nothing there. And it happened again at 2 a.m., then at 5 p.m., then midnight, random times, always the same intense light with no source to it. No source. And after that, the family felt these electrical currents through the house. Constant shocks touching doorknobs and switches. Steven called an electrician who spent 3 hours checking everything, and he said that he found absolutely nothing wrong with any of it. So the electrician himself, clearly not knowing what to say or believe, he said, it must be atmospheric. But then the doors started opening on their own. Steven would close a door, walk away, and then hear it creak back open. Every door in the home. The basement door, of course, was the worst. I mean, he would lock it, hear it click, turn around, and then find it standing open again. I mean, how is that possible? Now, I know Steven, just saying, was in a bit of a tough situation, but this is the moment when I lock a door and it's wide open, I'd be getting the heck out of there. Let me know if you would too in the comments. But on day number 5, Steven tried hanging a picture of an angel on the wall. It fell. So he rehung it again, this time very carefully, making sure that it couldn't fall. And it fell again. The third time, I kid you not, the picture jumped off the nail and flew forward a foot and then crashed face down. And Steven was in shock, so he just left it there. And then came the breathing. Try to imagine it. Heavy, labored breathing, like someone who had just finished running. Steven would be alone and hear it right behind him, so close that he could actually feel it, and he would spin around to see what's there, and there'd be nothing. But the breathing continued for minutes at a time, just standing there listening to invisible lungs pulling in air and pushing it out. So as you could imagine, by day number 8, just after a week, none of them were sleeping. Steven's daughter wouldn't even stay in her own room. His oldest son, Michael, which is a good name, slept on the couch because something stood at the end of his bed every night just watching him. Then on day 10, his middle son came running upstairs, white as a ghost, and he said that he'd seen a figure in the basement, shadows that were near the butcher's shower. It's a man, his son said. But something was wrong with him. He just stood there. And when I moved, he looked at me. So Steven, clearly at this point running out of options, he held his son and told him that he didn't have to go to the basement anymore. In fact, consider it sealed off. But Steven still did not want to believe it. So fast forward to Sunday night, which was day 13. Not even 2 weeks in the house at this point. The kids were sitting on the floor watching TV, backs to the living room door. Steven sat on the couch facing them, thinking about what to do. They could not afford to break the lease, but they couldn't keep living like this. And right there, that's when he saw it. Movement in his peripheral vision. I'm sure we've all seen something like it, but it was something right there at the kitchen doorway. So he turned his head ever so slowly. A man was standing there, at least the shape of a man, but of churning darkness. This black and gray smoke that was swirling within a solid form, like something alive trapped inside trying to escape. And it was tall, broad-shouldered, completely still. And it was just there, standing in the fully lit doorway, watching Stephen, watching his children. So Stephen kind of caught his breath and he said, "This can't be real." He squeezed his eyes shut. Stress, exhaustion, his mind playing tricks on him. Anything that you could try to think of to get your mind out of what it just saw, he tried. And then he opened them. And guess what? You already know. Yep, it was still there. The churning darkness moved like smoke and wind, but the figure stood perfectly motionless. Stephen was in beyond shock. He couldn't move. He couldn't speak. His kids laughed at something on the TV, completely unaware that something stood 15 feet away behind them. And the entity stood there for about 30 seconds, but he said it felt like literally forever. And then it slowly began to melt, dissipating like morning fog. It was gone. Stephen's hand shook, his heart pounded, and he thought at that time there's two different choices. Jump up screaming and run, or stay calm and get out quietly. So he stood up, and in his calmest voice that he could possibly say at that time, he said,
"Hey guys, let's go get a soda and visit Grandma."
Once he said that, of course, his youngest was excited. The older two looked at him like he'd lost his mind just because of the way he stood up and said it so robotically. But they went and they got in the car, and Stephen drove to his mother's house and told them that they needed to stay the night. Something about a weird smell, probably the water heater, he said, knowing damn well that's not what it was. And believe it or not, they never went back as a family. Stephen returned 3 times to pack with his brother, never alone. Even then, he moved fast, throwing things into boxes, desperate just to get out. And after this, later, researching the house, Stephen discovered the entity actually had a name. Captain John T. Crow, Civil War era. Who he was or why he haunted that house, Stephen never found out. The LaChance family lived there exactly 13 days. And Stephen thought it was over. He thought that they had escaped. But the house wasn't done. Not with Stephen, and definitely not with the next victims. Alright, so now imagine this. 3 full years had passed by, okay? And Stephen tried to move on. He tried to forget about the whole thing. But the house wouldn't let him. He would wake up at night, hear this screaming man from his nightmares that was always echoing in his head. The image of that churning shadow figure was burned. It was seared into his memory. So, in 2004, Stephen decided to write about this experience, and he put this story out online. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people reached out, sharing their own paranormal experiences, asking questions, and offering theories. But then, he got the one message that changed everything. And it was from a woman named Helen, who had moved into his old house. Helen was a school teacher. She was also recently divorced, trying to make a fresh start with her teenage daughter. And just like Stephen, she had thought she had found the perfect place. Affordable, spacious, quiet neighborhood. And she was experiencing the exact same things that Stephen had seen, but worse. And through mutual connections now in the paranormal community, Stephen learned the details. And that was Helen's husband, because they remarried after they were divorced, were trying to make things work. And they did not believe in the paranormal. They thought it was superstition. He told Helen to stop being dramatic, to get over it. And the local priest came and gave what Stephen would later call a half you-know-what blessing. You know, he sprinkled some holy water, said a few prayers, left, and it did not work. So at this point, Helen was desperate, she was alone, she was terrified, and Stephen somehow still felt responsible because he had lived there. He knew what she was facing, and he knew that he had to help. So he reached out to her because, like I said, he just had to help. And what Stephen discovered when he connected with Helen made his 13 days look like a warning. Just a preview of what the house was truly capable of. And the attacks on Helen started the same way that they started on Stephen's family. Lights, doors, breathing. But then, since she didn't leave, she stayed, well, it escalated. Objects flew across the room, not just falling, flying, hurled by invisible hands. Furniture was moved on its own. Strange smells filled the house that were putrid, rotting odors that would appear and disappear without a source. And then, via the name of the house, came the screaming. And like I said, that's where the house earned its nickname, the Union Screaming House, because of the sounds that poured out from it. Inhuman shrieks and wails that neighbors would hear echoing throughout the night. And when police were called, the sounds would stop the moment that officers arrived, as if this thing, whatever it was intelligent. And that's when, sadly, Helen's pets started dying, one by one. No explanation. Healthy animals just suddenly died. And that's when the entity began touching Helen. She'd feel hands on her shoulders, her back, her neck, pushing, grabbing. And at night, she would wake up to the sensation of something pressing downward on her chest, suffocating her. If any of you have ever had sleep paralysis, then you know what I'm talking about. So Stephen, like I said, feeling somewhat responsible for this, he ended up bringing in these paranormal investigators. And some of them took it seriously, conducted professional investigations, they captured EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, voices on recording saying, "Get out," and "Mine."
Gates open, let's move.
EMF is climbing yellow now.
Thermal's picking up something by that mirror.
Did you see that?
Door's moving, it's reading red.
Mist coming
ready?
out.
Let's find out who's up here.
Get out. Mine.
Other groups showed up drunk, smoked pot in their cars during the investigation, treated it more like a party, and Helen was running out of options and hope. And then came the possession. You see, Helen's personality began to change. She'd have episodes where she was not herself, periods that she could not remember, where she would say things that she would never ever say. She would do things that she would never do. Her eyes would change during these episodes. They would go dark as if they were empty inside. Totally empty. This was as close as you could get to the Hell House LLC nightmare that came to life. Shadow figures, possession, a house that consumed everyone who stayed. Stephen watched it happen over the months. Helen would be absolutely fine, and then something would cloud over her eyes and she would just be gone, replaced by something else that was inhabiting her body, if you could imagine that. This entity claimed Helen had been SA'd by the spirits in the house. Now, whether this was true or a manifestation of psychological torture she was enduring, Stephen never knew for certain. But Helen believed it, and the terror in her eyes was real. Meanwhile, during all of this, Helen's husband still refused to help. He'd been raised to, leave well enough alone when it came to spirits. So Helen had absolutely nobody except now Stephen, who kept showing up, kept trying to find somebody who could help her. But that's when the possession grew stronger. One day, Helen became convinced her husband was cheating on her. In this possessed rage, she drove to his workplace with a knife. She was going to kill him. And one of her daughter's friends, who had also been affected by the house, handed Helen the knife and praised its cutting ability. Helen's husband survived, only because somebody intervened before she could strike. And then another time, Helen showed up at Stephen's house in the middle of the night. Stephen heard pounding at the front of his door, violent, frantic pounding that woke him up from his sleep. So he came downstairs in his pajamas and looked through the peephole. Helen was standing on the porch, but it wasn't Helen. Her face was like twisted with rage, eyes wide open and vacant, completely black in the porch light. She was screaming profanities, words Stephen had never heard her use. And in her right hand, she was holding a gun. Stephen's blood went cold. He called out to her through the door, "Helen, it's me, it's Stephen. You're okay, you're safe." And she screamed back, but the words weren't coherent. Just rage and hatred pouring out of her mouth. So she raised the gun and pointed it at the door, at Stephen. Stephen dove to the side just as she pulled the trigger. The bullet punched through the front door, through the spot where his head had been seconds earlier, and embedded itself in the wall that was behind him. So he called 911 while staying low. But before police could arrive, something changed. Stephen heard Helen collapse on the porch. He looked through the window and saw her just sitting there, the gun on the ground beside her, her head in her hands, just sobbing. But he decided to actually open the door up just very carefully. And that's when Helen looked up at him with her own eyes again, normal, terrified and confused, and she said, "Stephen, what am I doing here? What happened?" She didn't remember any of it. Not driving to his house, not the screaming, not pulling the trigger. This entity had taken over her completely and used her body like a puppet, and then left her with no memory of what it had made her do. And two people connected to the house ended up institutionalized, their minds shattered by what they had experienced there. And that's when the Roman Catholic Church investigated, and they produced a 156-page report documenting everything that they had witnessed and heard. Their conclusion, the Union Screaming House was a textbook case of demonic infestation, oppression, obsession, and full possession. Now, the battle for Helen's soul took over 2 years. Stephen stayed with her throughout it all, coordinated with priests, brought in demonologists, researched everything that he could about the history of this house and the land on it. Multiple attempts were made to cleanse Helen, to free her from this entity's grip. Some worked temporarily, others failed completely. But gradually, over those 2 agonizing years, Helen was freed. The possession loosened its grip, and she moved away far from the house. She went to stay with another daughter that was 2 towns over. She recovered slowly, but she did recover. And Helen, believe it or not, was one of the lucky ones. Stephen LeChance escaped that house with his children after 13 days. He thought he got away. He thought it was over. Helen moved in years later and lasted longer, but barely. It took 2 years to save her from complete demonic possession. 2 people were institutionalized. Pets died. A woman almost murdered her husband and Stephen, all because of what lived inside that house. So some of you may ask, the house. Well, the house itself, it is still standing. Same address, same walls, same basement where Stephen's son was chased by something that he couldn't see. Same kitchen where that churning shadow figure appeared. And since then, different families have lived there since. Some stay longer than others. The town of Union, Missouri kept its secret for years. It didn't want to scare people, didn't want the reputation. But after Stephen's book came out in 2008, well, the secret was finally public. And now, paranormal investigators from around the world have studied that property. And they all report the same things. The voices, the shadow figures, the cold spots, the feeling of being watched constantly, being touched, the heavy, labored breathing coming from right behind them. Captain John T. Crow, the entity Stephen saw the 13th night, is still there, is still watching, and still waiting. The house that Stephen LeChance thought was his family's redemption, his salvation, became their nightmare. He escaped with his children in the middle of the night after less than 2 weeks. Helen thought she had found a nice place to raise her daughter. Instead, she spent 2 years fighting for the essence of her soul. But here's what still keeps Stephen up at night. Even now, 23 years later, he got out after 13 days. Helen survived, but barely. But whoever's living there now, well, they might not be so lucky. Because for some reason, somehow, some houses don't just haunt you. Some houses consume you. And the Union Screaming House, this Hell House, well, it seems to be forever hungry. Thank you guys so much for watching this. I love you all, Midnight Mafia, so much, I truly do. If you could do me one huge favor to help the channel out, a like. Subscribe if you keep finding yourself coming back, that's awesome, but a like really helps out this channel. But if you want to continue on this roller coaster, well, then watch this one right here. But if you're looking for something a little different to change the mood, then watch this one right here. I love you all. I'll see you next time. Cheers.